where they've done collagen prior to the heavy isometrics for like 5 sets of like 45 seconds or whatever, and trying to progressively overload the isometrics. And they're doing that like twice a week in some cases. And we're seeing over a period of time that injured area is healing as well.
Welcome to Swift Coaches Academy, a podcast dedicated to bringing health and wellness professionals the uncensored truth behind what it really takes to succeed in the health industry with me, your host, Xenia Wood. As an accredited exercise physiologist and business owner for almost a decade, I'm on a mission to transform the lives of ambitious health professionals like you who want more and are ready to take action to create incredible impact in your careers and unlock financial freedom in your business. So join me as I speak candidly with industry leaders about the struggles and successes from within the trenches through thought-provoking conversations.
In this episode, we have Xenia's conversation with accredited practicing dietitian Aidan Muir. As the founder of the Brisbane-based dietetics company, Ideal Nutrition, this conversation dives deep into how collagen, protein, and carbohydrates can all benefit exercise and rehab in different ways. Aidan also provides specific nutrition protocols you can start using with your clients today for better client results and without needing to be a nutritionist yourself.
Aidan Muir, the dietitian who is pretty infamous in Brisbane at least, and then on the gram. How are you going?
I'm going good, thanks. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. We dived straight in before because obviously you and I have like a personal relationship as well that happened organically through Instagram, which is a pretty cool thing. I've got like all these Instagram friends now who I am actually friends with in real life, which is nice. What I would love to speak to you about today, and I mentioned we might get you back on to talk about business and how you grew your Instagram and your social media presence and things like that. But today specifically, I wanted to dive into some education stuff specifically for other health professionals or potentially exercise professionals from that angle, so that we can learn how to better service and help support our clients, understand some nutrition stuff. Obviously, as a practicing dietitian, you work with athletes, you work with Gen Pop. Why don't we start with, who's your typical clientele?
I say pretty broad range, hey. So I would say that I'm 50% split between general population and 50% split between athletes. And in that general population, it's like, once again, another 50% split towards like weight loss. And then the other 50% of that is like irritable bowel syndrome, diabetes, other medical conditions, that type of situation. And with the athletes, I work with a lot of strength athletes, particularly powerlifters, Olympic weightlifters, a little bit of CrossFit stuff as well. And then some endurance and then some team sports. So it's all over the place, but I kind of like all of those areas as well.
That's epic. And so I know that you have created partnerships and really great relationships with, powerlifting coaches and other niche areas. How did they start?
So the first thing I'm a big believer in is I'm a big believer with going deep rather than broad, in that a lot of people, when trying to build relationships, they try to contact so many people. Like, I know of bosses who have sent KPIs of like meet 5 new allied health professionals each month and stuff like that. But like, it's almost like ticking a box. I'm a big believer in like all you need is a few relationships. I've seen certain dietitian businesses who've been built largely off of just one connection. They've met like one exercise physiologist who's referred heaps of clients, and that's really got the ball rolling. How do I personally go about getting this? My legitimate hack / strategy is I use services myself. I see physios, I see exercise physiologists, I see massage therapists, and I typically will see people for like 6 months and then kind of move on to the next one. Like you obviously know me personally, I've had like a knee injury that feels great now. It's been good for like over a year now, but it was about a 2-year phase where I was having a lot of issues, and I would see people for like 6 months, give them a proper crack, like honestly, just like fully buy into everything to the best of my ability, and then I'd move on to another one. And in that process of me just doing something personally for myself, I'd obviously talk about the fact that I'm a dietitian. They'd follow me on Instagram, they'd see the stuff I was posting, and they would naturally, like a high percentage of the time, convert to them referring. Wasn't why I was doing it, but if you look at the majority of my partnerships, that's how I've gotten a lot of them.
Mm-hmm. I really love that strategy too, because I find that when we create like deep, strong relationships, like you want to work with people who you're friends with, and you want to go and I've heard people talk about the do you want to go and have a beer with them test, or beverage of
Yeah.
choice. And like, you know, we've gone out for coffee before and hung out and tried to shop and life as well. And I think that you're exactly right. The relationships that are deeper are going to grow more roots, and we're going to want to work with those people, because you can't create 100 really close relationships. And
No.
so I think that that's a really great point, because some people might, you know, you may need to put feelers out to 20 people to get a couple of people to
Yeah.
want to say, hey, like, let's go and grab a coffee. But then when you find people who you click with, and you're like, fuck, this person really knows about X or Y, or I really love the strategy that they do here. And it's like, you can have, I'm sure you do, have 5 different exercise professionals that you would refer to, but it's like one's the powerlifter, one's the yoga
Yeah.
instructor, and so one's the shoulder guy. Like, you can still use people who are the same profession but have different niche areas, and then be able to refer to them. And then I guess in the inverse, it's probably intelligent for you to be a little bit more broad in your stuff, because you are able to service a greater population. Is that kind of like how it's just worked out, or was that intentional?
Yeah, that's going to be the goal as well. Like we're a team of 6 now, but it's like every new hire, I'm kind of like, what do they add to this situation? Like, and whenever like I whether a friend or someone is like, hey, I want to refer this person to you, this is what they're looking to get, I always kind of be like, is our team like well equipped to handle that? And if they're not, like, we've kind of got to cover that at some stage. And although it sounds like I am a bit all over the place with everything I do, all those things I listed off in terms of like those areas I work in, that's kind of what I work in. And there's areas I don't work in. I don't work in eating disorders. There's stuff I don't do. So although it's broad, we're still not trying to cover everything. We're just trying to cover a lot of the things, and a lot of the things that I care about.
And so I know that one of your dietitians is plant-based, and then I'm
Yep.
assuming the others have kind of like interest areas as well. Is that kind of how you're looking for more
Yeah.
niche dietitians to join your team, or like
Yeah.
a different avenue so you can service broadly with your company, but specifically with your people?
Yeah, 100%. Like, even though I said like we don't do a lot of eating disorder stuff, it's like, sure, like if we got an eating disorders dietitian, like it gives us a huge avenue to do that.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's cool. Let's dive into some more education around nutrition, coming from maybe like a movement specialist point of view. The biggest thing that came to mind when I was thinking, what can we dive into today, was some stuff for rehab, first and foremost. And then, so let's go into that first. With nutrition for rehab, collagen gets thrown around a lot, and I am absolutely not the expert in this, which is why you're here, which is what I love. Can you explain to me and anyone who's listening what the relationship is between rehabilitation, collagen? Is it specific for tendons, or does it help with everything?
Yeah, this is just a huge topic, hey? And it's even a huge topic in that I'm one of what I'd say the more pro collagen people, in that like I do think it is providing benefit, but we're also not at a point where there's heaps of randomized control trials being put together being like, let's get 50 people with Achilles tendinopathy, let's give half them collagen, half them placebo, and let's actually see improved outcomes. Like, we're not really at that point. Some of those studies exist on smaller scales and they look relatively promising, but so it's like, I'm going to say a lot of stuff now, and it's like there is a chance that I'm wrong and this stuff doesn't matter, but that's what I'm putting the caveat out. I believe it matters, but maybe there's a chance. So let's go through mechanisms, why it could work and everything like that. I personally don't think it's so much about the magical collagen supplement by itself. I think a large portion of it is actually due to the amino acid profile. So we typically think of good protein sources like whey protein and stuff like that. We look at certain amino acids like it's high in leucine, it's high in like a biological value of protein and stuff like that. Collagen is like the opposite of that. A lot of good protein sources are high in certain amino acids, and collagen is very low in those key amino acids for muscle growth. But because it is low in that, it has room to be high in certain other amino acids like glycine, for example. And there's a few amino acids that's really high in that seem to be more linked with collagen synthesis in the body. And we could also potentially be getting some benefits from collagen peptides, but that's another topic that I'll get back to. But if I was looking at like what injuries is this most likely to be beneficial for, it's most likely to be beneficial for tendons and ligaments. And there's potential that it could maybe be beneficial for cartilage related issues, but like that's a complex topic because it's like, I don't think it's really doing much for the cartilage. Maybe it's doing stuff for the tendons and ligaments around there that's kind of helping as well. Another topic. But going back to the mechanism with the amino acids, I believe a large portion of this is, or the best way to use this is having collagen 40 to 60 minutes before a rehab session, getting blood flow to that area. And I don't mean change the rehab to get blood flow to the area. I mean, do whatever would be the most appropriate rehab to start off with, and blood flow will be a byproduct. Tendons and ligaments, they get less blood flow than muscles, but they still get some blood flow. If you look at tendinopathies, for example, we'll see increased vascularization as well. It's like the body's trying to get more blood to the area anyway. And we know that the amino acids from collagen peak in the blood about 40 to 60 minutes after consumption. And theoretically, we're getting some amino acids to those tendons and ligaments at that time. That's the mechanism. I can talk about outcomes, but is there anything you want to talk about with that before I keep going?
Yeah, I had a couple of questions.
Yeah.
First one is why tendons and ligaments over, let's say, muscle?
Yeah. So the muscle thing is a very easy thing to unpack. So if we look at the biological value of proteins in terms of key amino acids, like linked to muscle growth and stuff like that, we'd see stuff like whey protein. It's on a scale of 100, right? So we've got like whey protein and eggs and stuff like that up near 100. We have other animal-based sources all above 90 pretty much. Then we have like a few plant-based sources. I believe soy is around 70. We have like wheat at 50, and then collagen is at 0. Collagen is like the outlier in terms of being low in these key amino acids that are linked to muscle growth. It's low in BCAAs, it's low in leucine, which is a BCAA. So it's like theoretically it isn't really strongly linked with muscle growth. But then there's also research comparing collagen to whey protein, stuff like that, not being linked with muscle growth very well. There's even one study that's kind of like, I call this a bit of a nail in the coffin type of study, in that researchers got collagen and they added leucine to it to match the leucine content of whey protein. And then they measured muscle growth over a period of, I believe it was 8 weeks, and whey protein still outperformed. Like if we had any, it's not a hot take, right? If we had pretty much any protein powder and we compared it to collagen, collagen would underperform for muscle growth in comparison to that. There are some people who make some arguments being like, maybe it's not leading to as much muscle protein synthesis, but it'll increase the growth of the fascia, which will facilitate future muscle growth. And I'm like, I think we're really getting to a speculative leap at that stage.
Yeah, I mean, fascial growth, is that really what you're aiming for?
Yeah.
If that's possible,
so
right?
it's like there's nothing that really makes me think that like it will help with muscle growth or even like repair from like a muscle tear if there's no tendon or anything related there. Whereas like we do see research on collagen synthesis rates. Like there's a few studies out there, like for example, they got people having collagen prior to like skipping for 6 minutes, and then they measured collagen synthesis in the body and they compared it to placebo, and collagen synthesis increased dramatically. So it's like it's not a stretch to assume that that's going to be increasing collagen synthesis in the Achilles tendon in that example.
Okay, and so if we know that collagen, if I'm understanding correctly, collagen isn't helping muscle protein synthesis, why is it helping tendons and ligaments? What's the argument for that?
I believe it's largely just due to the fact that the amino acids in it are, or in the ratio that they're in, are more strongly linked with collagen synthesis. Just like if we look at muscle protein synthesis and we look at like leucine and these BCAAs and stuff like that are more strongly linked with muscle protein synthesis, it's like the amino acids that are linked with collagen synthesis. Collagen itself, the supplement, just happens to be high in those amino acids.
Okay, cool. And so are we pretty confident on tendons and then ligaments is like a maybe, or are they both in the same category of like equal benefit opportunity?
Yeah, I personally am much higher in its effect for tendons. I kind of just like chuck ligaments in there. It kind of makes sense to me. But I actually have not seen anywhere near as much research on the ligament side of things as the tendon side of things. Using examples as to why I'm kind of like higher on it for tendons and stuff like that. So like we've seen, it's mostly Keith Barr's work. We have seen other stuff, but like he's just had some just crazy case studies where like we see in tendon rehab where often the area is injured. Like if you get an MRI, we see this injured area. People go through a rehab protocol. They're pain-free 12 weeks later or whatever. Not everyone gets pain-free, but like just making that point, like a lot of people will get pain-free and they get another MRI and they still have that injured area there on the MRI. They're not experiencing pain, but that injured area still exists. A lot of the work Keith Barr has done has been as simple as continuing a regular or a solid strength and conditioning profile, like kind of program, heavy isometrics, in addition to that, where they've done collagen prior to the heavy isometrics for like 5 sets of like 45 seconds or whatever, and trying to progressively overload the isometrics. And they're doing that like twice a week in some cases. And we're seeing over a period of time that injured area is healing as well. There was one study it was just a case study on like a discus thrower who had bilateral patellar tendinopathy, and 5 weeks of doing these isometrics every single day with the collagen before that. When he got an MRI at the end of it, neither of his knees, they could find any evidence of tendinopathy. It's like, that's kind of like, it almost sounds too good to be true. We know from a rehab perspective that we don't actually need the pathology to go away to get pain-free. But it's still kind of cool that we're actually seeing this, which is quite a rare outcome. Whereas I haven't looked too deep on the ligament stuff on that. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Do you think that it's necessary? Like, obviously, like, it's absolutely cool that we can potentially heal the body and come to a state that looks like an uninjured tendon.
Yeah.
And we obviously know that something that's been injured before or has some sort of scarring or whatever is likely to be re-injured again. But outside of that, do you
I
believe...
think it's necessary? No, I don't think so. No. It's clearly not necessary, and that's why I use the example of being like, hey, 12 weeks rehab, people often getting better, and they've still got the injured area. It's like, doesn't matter. Obviously, it doesn't matter. But when I'm looking at it from the perspective of being like, could it help? I can see a role for it helping.
Yeah, it's like the do no harm, but then if it does no harm and there's potential benefit, then why the fuck would you not try that at least? Because there's potential upside with very little to no downside.
Yeah, 100%. And like, they're using the randomized control trials. Like, there is a few studies where they've done like, I think Louise Burke she was an author on one of these papers she was at the AIS. I don't know what she's doing now. I think Catholic University or something like that. But they put together a study on Achilles tendinopathy, and they basically just did like calf raises and a return to run program. Half of them got collagen, half of them got placebo. And the collagen group actually did get improved outcomes. Like, they actually had better pain scores and better function. So that's the thing we really care about. We don't really care about the pathology too much. We do care about the outcomes. We just need more of those studies. Like, right now I can name like only a couple of those studies where they're measuring the outcomes.
Yeah.
But it's like,
what the fuck are they measuring if they're not measuring the outcomes?
Yeah, like I guess like with the Keith Barr like case studies, like they're measuring outcomes, but it's kind of hard to tell because like the most famous one was like an 18-month study of an NBA player. And like, how do you measure the outcomes of somebody who is playing in the NBA? Like, they measured that he played 50 games per season, and they measured like how many points per game he scored. But like, it was hard to measure pain scores because at the start of the study, he was saying he was in no pain because he wanted to play basketball. Like, he wanted to like be on
like
the court.
his doctors
were
like, you need to say zero pain to be able to get on the court.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, zero pain. Yep.
Yeah, and like at the end of the study, he said, "Oh yeah, no, I was like really struggling at the start of the study." It's like, it's hard to like trust that self-reported pain kind of score from somebody like that. So that, once again, more research kind of solves this with like different populations and stuff like that. It's just very early days.
Okay, that's pretty cool. That's pretty interesting. And so, can you explain the collagen protocol? You said like 40 minutes before an exercise session is your preference, but like, how much of it do we need to take? What type is best? If we're like, cool, I've got a tendinopathy that I'm working with right now, what do I do?
Yeah, cool. So I would say the specific protocol is 15 to 25 grams of collagen or gelatin 40 to 60 minutes before a rehab session. An obvious question some people say is, could I have it on rest days? And theoretically, yes. I just don't think it would be as effective as when you do have it on the training days, like, because you're not timing it with that kind of like the whole blood flow concept I talked about. Vitamin C, you need vitamin C in your system when you're doing this, because that is involved in collagen synthesis. That's very important for research because a lot of research is done in a fasted state, which therefore means any collagen supplement study that has no vitamin C in it is probably useless. But in the real world, we pretty much always have like vitamin, unless you're training fasted or whatever, like you probably have consumed some form of vitamin C at some stage. So
it's
like,
in most of our like natural, it's in most of our natural foods that we consume.
Yeah, so like I reckon like I often recommend a collagen supplement that has vitamin C just to be 100% sure that we're guaranteed to have it in our system. But it's like most people won't need to worry about it. Like that's just naturally going to take care of itself.
So,
The
unless the exception potentially would be like if you're training in the morning fasted with
Yeah,
collagen
then it'd
that
be
doesn't
important.
have vitamin C, then that might be less effective.
Yeah, 100%. It would very likely be less effective. And this is just because vitamin C is a water soluble vitamin, so like it won't really be in our system to a great degree if you do that.
Okay, cool. And so like how many times a week? Like is it before every single session? Do you want to be training a minimum of 3 times a week on this like muscle group or tendon?
Yeah. So like I think it's simple to just keep it before sessions involving the tendon or ligament that you are targeting. Like if somebody has a knee issue and they train lower body twice per week, I'll just use it twice per week, right? But you can do so much with this. There's no right or wrong. I'm aware that quite a few years ago, I don't know if they're still doing this, but like the Brumbies, like the rugby union team, when they would get an ACL tear, so we are looking at ligament stuff there, they would rehab 3 times a day. They do the same total volume that they would have done in one session, but they've just spread it out over 3 sessions. They do their sessions 6 hours apart every single time. Once again, coming back to Keith Barr's work of like he did some like random like in vitro testing that made it look like tendons and ligaments like recover best after 6-hour intervals or something like that, or collagen synthesis kind of like peaks and comes back down. So it's like once again a speculative leap, but this is a professional team that is using this kind of research, and they were having collagen 3 times per day in that 15 to 25 gram amount before every single session. And it's hard to say once again, is that better or does that not matter? You can see how it could be better, but maybe it doesn't matter.
Okay, so I mean, ideally you want to be training your tendons if you've got a tendinopathy at least twice a week anyway, preferably 3. So,
Yeah.
is there any like minimum effective dose? Let's say you trained lower body 3 times a week and you only had your collagen once a week. Is more better? Is there a maximum dose?
So yeah, I would say like more in terms of using it more frequently, if you would like that would make sense. But in terms of like the minimum and maximum like amount you can have, like how have I settled on that 15 to 25 grams? It's basically because when they've measured collagen synthesis in the body, they've found that if they've compared 5, 10, 15 grams, 15 grams has led to more collagen synthesis in the body than 5 has. And then I kind of work on the assumption that's like, hey, if those participants were like 80 kilos, there's plenty of people I work with who are over 100. That's why I say 15 to 25. But there's not actually that much research on higher dosages above 15. So with the osteoarthritis research, they've found like there's been some positive findings here and there where they've used absurdly low dosages. And I'm like, I don't know how much I buy that. Like it's just like the dosages are just quite low. Like it'd be like if you gave somebody, I know this is a more controversial take, but it'd be like if you gave somebody 5 grams of protein powder and you're measuring muscle growth, it's like, is it really doing that much? But the only study that I'm aware of off the top of my head that they've gone above 15 grams, they did use collagen post-workout. This was actually a very recent study, and they didn't find any difference in terms of tendon or ligament growth or recovery or anything like that. Like, didn't find anything positive taking it post-workout. I saw somebody sharing it on Instagram kind of being like, oh, this is evidence that collagen doesn't work. I think it adds to the body of evidence because it's like, that's the first time I've seen anyone use 30 grams. Like that's a lot in comparison to what's been used. But it also, one is only just one study, and it also doesn't line up with that whole pre-workout kind of hypothesis that I was kind of talking about too.
Okay, cool. That's great. I love that. I feel like I've learned a lot from that. I feel like that's really clear in my mind that we want to be having collagen 15 to 25 grams, maybe about 15 if you're about 80 kilos, before every workout that trains a tendon that is needing or going through rehab. Is there anything I've missed?
Exactly. That's it. That's a clear protocol. And if you look at summarizing everything else I've said, you can come to the conclusion that doing that, either it helps or it doesn't. There's no downside to it, and there's potentially huge upside to doing it. So if that's an investment that is worth making in terms of time, effort, money, etc., it makes sense. If that's not, then I can also understand that too.
Mm-hmm. Any other benefits for collagen, since we're on that topic, outside of tendon rehab? I'm sure there are, and I'm sure you have a greater depth of knowledge than I do on that.
Yeah, so like there's a few things people point to. Gut health, I don't think it really does anything there. Skin and hair and nails, there is like solid evidence that it helps, particularly with skin health. I just don't care about that. Like I care about the injury rehab stuff because it matters to me. Like I care about that. But with like the skin and stuff like that, I just don't care. From an athletic performance perspective, I would not be shocked if this does help athletic performance. Like if it's helping with the rehab stuff, like if we come to the conclusion this helps with rehab, could this help athletic performance? There's so many ways we can look at this. A few stats that I think are worth like thinking about. Apparently, Olympic weightlifters have around 3 times thicker patellar tendons than the average person. Does that sport just self-select for freaks who have thick tendons, or do they hypertrophy a little bit in the process? Like that kind of stuff happens very slowly over time, but it's like it wouldn't be absurd to think that collagen could lead to stronger tendons that could help with performance and stuff like that. The other thing is athletic performance in terms of like sprinting, jumping, etc. Right now, to the best of my knowledge, there is one study on that, and it's just looking at counter movement jump. And one group got collagen, one group got placebo, and they did a training protocol. And the group that got placebo performed worse at the end of the study, and the group that got collagen just remained at the baseline. And it's like, okay, collagen outperformed, but that's not overly promising because the other group got worse. Like, I'm not going to read too much into it. It's one study. But if we had like 10 studies showing that collagen outperformed, I'd obviously be more positive. But that's an area that I'm interested in, being like, if we get more research on that, will it help athletic performance or will it not? It's hard to say.
Mm-hmm. That's really cool. And so then if we extrapolate and hypothesize, considering there's not much research on potential benefits for non-athletes or like general pops who are just doing a bit of exercise, maybe they do some gym training, but they're not doing anything like explosive or plyometric or competing at a high level. Do you believe that there's potential benefit for them as well?
I do think so. Like, I think it would potentially reduce the like likelihood of niggles and stuff like that, like elbow pain, etc. Like maybe they can train a little bit harder because of that. Maybe like they can bench press a little bit more weight because they have stronger like elbows. Like it's hard to say for sure, but like I do think there'd be a little bit of benefit there.
Super interesting. It'll be great to stay tuned and like have a look at new research and as that comes out, sort of, I mean, if people are not following you, Aidan the Dietitian or Ideal Nutrition, tons of informative research-based posts and things that you guys put out. So that's probably the most up-to-date place to continue to keep on that track with that, because something that I'm definitely interested in. And it's cool that there's potentially minimal to no downside of this, other than potentially like the time and money investment with upsides available. So that's really cool.
Yeah.
Anything else that you wanted to bring up in terms of collagen or rehab or anything that I haven't mentioned? Because I know I dived to the collagen because that's sort of the area that I'm aware of.
Yeah.
Anything else for rehab in terms of like, I'm assuming obviously like your protein's still important. You know, like in terms of carbohydrates, is it something where we maybe want to make sure that we still have enough carbs available when we're going through rehab and not remove those?
Yeah, so let's touch on both of those things. So we'll start with protein. So keeping protein quite high is important. It obviously depends on the injury, but let's go extreme. Let's say somebody gets an injury like an ACL tear, they have surgery, and then there's immobilization that occurs. In that immobilized state, we can lose muscle very quickly. Like I'm sure you're aware of like research on how like if the average person just stops going to the gym for like 2 or 3 weeks, we don't really see much muscle loss, right? But if somebody like is immobilized, to the best of my understanding, like we see like in like 7 to 14 days, we see like quad sizes reducing by like 20%. Like it happens quick. It's just that complete immobilization that's an issue. And anything we can do to reduce that loss is huge, both in the short term, but also for like late stage rehab. Like if you lose 10% of your quad size instead of 20%, it's probably going to help make that return to sport and stuff like that down the line easier. So with protein, like if we say standard recommendations for an athlete trying to build muscle is like 1.6 to 2.2 grams per kilogram of body weight protein per day, there is quite strong evidence indicating that like for an immobilization stage, we should be above 2.2 grams per kilogram of body weight protein per day, which can also be logistically difficult because people get injured, they don't really want to eat, and then there's a chance people end up eating like significantly less than they normally would. But if you can eat more during that phase, you can end up with like some much better outcomes. So like the protein one is huge, prioritizing that, balancing that with the fact that your calorie requirements are probably dropped, which leads into the point you kind of said about the carbohydrate thing. A lot of people's first instinct when they get injured is to completely drop calorie intake because one, they're not exercising as much. And two, sometimes people like to shift their focus. They're like, okay, well, if I can't prioritize muscle gain, I might as well take advantage of this to work on something. I'll work on fat loss or whatever. But the issue if you take the calorie intake reduction too low, including the carbohydrates as well, is you risk more muscle loss. Like that's a recipe for muscle loss in that, like if you're not able to train effectively, you have limitations, whether that's a mobilization or just the fact that like you just have a regular injury and you go into a massive calorie deficit, you're not in a position where you can be stimulating at least some form of muscle retention or anything like that. So the game plan in most situations is keep protein high and aim roughly for maintenance calories is what I would do in most cases. Although you can periodize the calorie intake a little bit, being like if somebody had a really long recovery journey, it's like directly after, let's eat maintenance calories. Let's say an ACL tear as an example. I like using that one as an example. Maintenance calories. Once you can get back into strength work, maybe let's do a small calorie surplus to like rebuild some quad strength and everything like that. And then as return to sport gets closer, maybe we go into a small calorie deficit to get back to like peak body composition and everything like that. And then just as you're returning to sport, go back to maintenance calories.
Okay, cool. And then the thing that comes up for me that I know that clients would have questions about is like, okay, but yes, I have a shoulder injury, but my goal is also weight loss. Like I don't really want to be in a maintenance or a surplus. How do I navigate both of those? Do they have to prioritize rehab or weight loss? Is there something that you find a middle ground with that?
Yeah, very case by case. And it's like, there's no reason you couldn't, like if somebody had a shoulder issue that depends on how long it's going to go for and everything like that. But like, let's just say shoulder issue is going to take 6 to 10 weeks to recover from. You could go into a small calorie deficit and maybe that takes it from 6 to 10 weeks to recover from to 7 to 11 weeks or something like that. But then you also work towards your fat loss in the meantime. Like, yeah, like there is a balance in between all of that. Like there's so many options and so many ways you can go about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's the hard thing, right? Because a lot of people, I guess particularly who come to us, they're like, yeah, I have this injury or whatever. And, part of it might even have been caused or be exacerbated by their excess weight that they're carrying. Let's say it's like a knee condition. Obviously, body weight plays into that. And so trying to manage both of those things at the same time. Do you tend to take a lean towards prioritizing?
That's why I'd go the periodization kind of model. Like I wouldn't, like say somebody's got a knee issue and the weight could be a factor in that. I wouldn't go into a calorie deficit for the entire journey recovering from the knee injury. I would maybe do it for a phase. And I would look at it, I would probably link it up with like, what are we able to do in the rehab program? Like being like, if somebody is in a phase of their rehab where they're able to train relatively effectively and they're trying to build strength, whether that's quads, whether that's whatever, I'd want at least some of that time to be spent at least on maintenance calories or in a calorie surplus, because it's possible, but it's quite hard to gain a significant amount of strength in a calorie deficit. And it's like, if we can work towards both goals by periodizing and being like, okay, this is a fat loss phase, let's lose fat during this phase and try and maintain as much strength as we can. And then also have a phase of like really prioritizing the strength work as well. You somehow get to tick both boxes. Whereas if you only just did one, you probably wouldn't get both of those goals.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Okay. What other questions do I have? I mentioned the carbohydrate thing. I'd love to come back to that for a second, because I think there's a bit of a misnomer that like carbs are bad and all that sort of stuff. And, if people are going to potentially cut certain macronutrients out of their diet, particularly when it comes to exercise and supporting them through either general training or rehab, are you encouraging people and recommending that they continue keeping particularly carbs in their diet throughout that? And then I'd love you to sort of talk to that, because I know that, I can say it, but sometimes when it comes from a dietitian, you can explain it a little better.
Yeah, there's so many angles to look at. Like 100%, it's like quite simple. I would keep carbs in at all times. I would adjust the amounts and stuff like that. Like say you were in a calorie deficit at some stage, I would go lower carbohydrate, but I wouldn't go low carb. If you were in another phase of rehab, like you want that to be in there fueling your performance. And one of the, like, I don't know how to word this very effectively, but like calories have to be coming from somewhere, and everyone is going to have at least decent calorie requirements. And if we've ticked the box on our protein needs and we've got like, say, above 1.6 or 2.2 or whatever the number is, we then distribute our calories between fats and carbohydrates. If you weren't exceptionally high fat and you went quite low carb, you would also just end up low calorie. And that would be too low calorie for the recovery needs and everything like that. So it's going to come from somewhere. And you could make an argument that with the carbohydrates, if you increase your carbohydrate intake a little bit more and reduce fat a little bit while eating appropriate calories, you could also get a bunch of micronutrients alongside that. You can get a bunch of vitamins and minerals and antioxidants and all these other things that can also help with the recovery as well. So it's like there's so many ways I could go about it, but like the simple version is like I'd still keep carbohydrates in at least at a decent level year round, and then I'd kind of periodize that based on your needs, sometimes higher, sometimes lower, but never really low specifically.
Okay. And so where do you think, or like the carbs is bad is kind of like this misnomer that gets thrown around, particularly I think that back when all the different yo-yo diets were coming out, the women who are now in their sort of 40s to 60s are very potentially fearful of carbohydrates particularly. Can you talk to the benefits of carbs while you're training, or like if you should potentially have them before training so that we can help to promote the strength or whatever they need without feeling like, you know, super carb dense?
I'll address the carbs is bad thing first, and I'll talk about the benefits of it. So like the carbs is bad thing, like firstly, like we have very, very, very clear research that if you get 1,000 people and you get 500 of them and you give them a certain amount of calories, a certain amount of protein, and you get them to go low carb, and you get another 500 and you give them the exact same calories, exact same protein, and you get them to go low fat. So same calories, same protein, just different carbs and fat amounts. In terms of fat loss, they get exactly the same results. Like it works out exactly the same. And that has been done in controlled environments where all food is provided. So we can see for sure that's like that actually happens when calories and protein are matched. But surprisingly, even in uncontrolled environments, like if you get a large sample size and get half to go low carb and half to go low fat, you see what happens in a year's time. On average, the results work out very similarly. There'll be individuals in there who will do better on certain approaches because they can stick to it more effectively and everything like that. But it is actually interesting to see that on average, it works out the same. A lot of people will point to insulin being an issue, being like, if I have more carbs, I have more insulin, that causes more fat gain. But so much to unpack there as well, because even if we simplified insulin down to being a storage hormone, it does a lot more, but if we just simplify it down to that, it still has to have stuff available to store. Carbs, protein, and fats, like carbs have 4 calories per gram, fat has 9 calories per gram, protein has 4 calories per gram. If we're burning more than we are storing, that's a calorie deficit that leads to fat loss regardless, but we only have so much available to be stored. It doesn't matter how high insulin is if we don't have enough calories coming in to be stored on our body. And from another perspective, like bodybuilders literally use insulin as a performance enhancing drug in some cases. Like insulin isn't just a bad thing, it can have benefits. But coming back to like carbohydrates for performance, the simplest thing is that it is our most effective fuel source. Like there are so many examples of this, but we even see, like, let's use marathons as an example, this concept of quote unquote hitting the wall, where people like get to a point and it gets harder and their pace drops off. That is usually when glycogen stores run out. Glycogen is the storage form of glucose, which is what carbohydrates break down into. Carbohydrates are our best fuel source. Theoretically, if you go into each training session well fueled with a decent amount of glycogen and you perform better, you can progressively overload easier, you can get more volume, and you could do whatever, and that can lead to better outcomes. This could be getting a little bit too deep, but like there's research on 6 sets of leg extensions to failure, depleting glycogen stores by about 40%, right? And some muscle fibers were a little bit higher than that, some were a bit lower than that. But if you went into a session, like those were just like general people just going about their lives eating a normal amount of carbohydrates. If you did go into a session where you were doing decent volume, but you were very low glycogen store, you would run out of glycogen stores relatively early into the session, and then your performance would be a little bit worse for like the rest of the session and then that could carry over to like a slower rehab journey and stuff like that as well.
I think that's really important. So I just want to reinforce that carbs are our best fuel source. So does that mean we want to have them like timing wise pre-training, or does it not matter? Is it just like throughout each day you want a significant, like a good amount?
I think both things are true. So like I think like if we're just like solely simplifying down to glycogen stores, theoretically you could have a bunch of carbs the day before, not really many carbs the morning of or whatever, do your training session, and you still got glycogen from the day before. But I think about that like kind of pre-workout window in a combination of getting some carbs in and also really prioritizing feeling good. Like if I trained at 5 p.m. today and I haven't eaten since 8 a.m. this morning, I'm not going to feel good. If I did that exact same thing and had some pre-workout carbs, I would definitely feel better and be able to train harder. There is even with that kind of pre-workout carb window as well, something that I'll add to like some pushback where some people would say like, oh yeah, but you could just have glycogen stores from the day before. We have research showing that if people do a carbohydrate mouth rinse, like if they just have like Gatorade or something like that, they don't even swallow it, they just put it in their mouth and spit it out, their performance often improves a little bit. Like if we're looking at studies, like about 75% of the research shows that performance improvements come from just a mouth rinse. And like I think the other 25% is just because the benefit's like not large enough to measure consistently in every single study. But if just a mouth rinse of carbohydrate is doing that, and like the bro science explanation is it's like tricking your body into thinking that more carbohydrates are coming in so you can work harder. If just a mouth rinse does that, getting some actual carbohydrates in is likely to be even more beneficial.
So for all the bodybuilders out there or anyone who's not trying to eat too many more calories, mouth rinse before
it's
training.
It's an option, yeah.
Yeah, like, or if you're in a cal deficit, like that sounds like
yeah
to be able to train harder, and you know, even if it is potentially placebo, it sounds like it's you know a bit more than that, but that sounds like a great option. And obviously actually getting the carbohydrates in to create the energy from the food is probably the better way to go with there. Is that?
Yeah.
Beautiful. I feel like we've covered so much today, and I really appreciate all of this because clearly you're very evidence-based in what you do, and you're staying up with the latest research and making sure that you're providing the best evidence both for your athletes and non-athlete population. What I'd love to do at the end of each of our episodes is give our listeners something actionable that they can take away from today and start to implement with themselves or with their clients immediately. So from the stuff we've talked about, is there something that you're like, this is the most important thing that I would love them to start using with themselves or their clients?
So hard to say. There's so many things. Like, I do think the collagen thing is an interesting one. Like, I can't say it's the most important thing because it like, as I said, either it's doing something or it's doing nothing. I think it's doing something, but if like 20 more studies come out and it turns out I'm wrong, I'll change my mind very quickly. But it's like, I think it's the most interesting thing that we've talked about, that not many people, like a lot of people write it off. Like, I'm going to use an example. Dr. Carl, everybody loves Dr. Carl. There's a TikTok clip of him like a year ago, just like saying that collagen couldn't work because it breaks down into the amino acids and doesn't stay as the collagen peptides. And firstly, technically it's slightly wrong because like the collagen peptides, about 10% of them do actually remain intact, but the mechanism I propose like literally relies on it breaking down into the amino acids. And like that's why I think it's like kind of an underrated thing, because there's like some very smart people, very evidence-based people who will criticize it and say that's not even logistically possible to help. So I wanted to come back to that and be like, that it's one thing that like has some potential still.
Okay, cool. So the potential to trial with anyone going through some sort of tendinopathy with clients, trial them having collagen pre-session. You could even have that available in your gym, or, you know, give them some stuff for that to see how their rehab goes and maybe report back, flick Aidan a DM on the gram and let him know if it worked or if someone's getting great results from it. Obviously case studies as well. But
Yeah.
cool to hear people putting it into practice and seeing, you know, their experience with it as well. So maybe we leave with that. Anyone got a tendon rehab that they're going through, add some collagen into your client's pre-workout routine. And just to clarify, You said about 40 minutes before. Can it be like immediately before?
Yeah.
Does it need some time to process before you train?
Nah, so like it takes 40 to 60 minutes to peak in the blood. Like if you're doing a 1 hour session and you took it 10 minutes before, it would still be like peaking the blood at the back end of that session. If you're still training that tendon, ligament, or whatever, you will definitely still be getting benefit from it. The other thing as well is almost everybody warms up in some capacity. So it's like if you took it like 20 minutes before you get to the gym, you're warming up, and then like it's probably peaking when you get to your first working set as well anyway.
Okay. Beautiful. Alrighty. We might leave it there. Aidan, how can people reach out to you, connect with you, get some support for nutrition from you and your team?
So the easiest way, or few ways. So the easiest way is just on Instagram. So Aidan_the_dietitian. I also have a podcast, so the Ideal Nutrition Podcast. And then the website is just idealnutrition.com.au. And it's easy to find out how to book in and stuff like that through that too.
Beautiful. Awesome. Thank you so much for your time today. This was super informative and I've learned a lot from today. So I appreciate your time. And maybe if we get a few people requesting us talking about your business side of stuff, we'll have to get you back on and have a chat about how you've grown your business as well.
Perfect. Thank you so much for having me. And I'd love to come back if that is an option.
Awesome. I love that. Talk to you soon, Aidan.
Cheers.
Did you find something valuable in this episode? If so, I'd like to ask a tiny favor. If you have 30 seconds now, I'd love you to follow or share the podcast. That way, we can continue to bring you more real, raw, and uncensored stories from industry leaders. We also love hearing from you and what you loved about every episode. The best way to reach out is to DM me personally on Instagram @SwiftCoachesAcademy. Until next time, and in whatever you do, move swiftly.